Yeah, this conversation is really bringing me back to some of the other founders we've spoken to in other spaces. And we hear similar challenges, right? When it comes to the actual needs of the environment and the biosphere. Those timescales, those geographies do not necessarily align with the efficiencies of capitalism and the timescales of capitalism, right? And so then you're sitting in the middle. You understand what the biosphere needs, but you've got investors over here, right? You've got customers over here, and you've got to sit in the middle and basically be a translator in between, right?
Hmm.
So what are your biggest translation challenges as the founder in this seat?
I think you hit the nail on the head with the finance structure, right? And I thought long and hard about whether I make this a nonprofit or whether it should be a for-profit. And that was a conscious choice. And I strongly believe for-profit is the best for scaling and for the planet. I think if you make it a nonprofit, you do like project by project, and it doesn't hit that liftoff velocity as easily. I think there's a translation challenge because you have venture capital over here that wants incredibly high growth, SaaS like models that I would argue are incompatible with hard tech in a lot of ways, and especially incompatible with clean tech. Even though you have firms that have a so-called double bottom line, it's hard to rectify. And then over here you've got the philanthropy and sort of grant money, sort of smaller checks. And we did win a $7 million Department of Energy grant, currently paused.
I was just going to say, did you ever get that?
Nope. And so you've got like sort of the grant tiny bucket where you can do a little bit. You've got some philanthropy, which we've been able to unlock some of that through debt vehicles. And then you've got these huge, project finance companies that will do infrastructure financing, at the sort of $100 million scale. And then ventures sort of this in between. And so there's a gap for first of a kind financing where if you're lucky, unlucky, you can get venture capital to do, an equity round and fund your first of a kind with equity capital, which is the most expensive capital. For a lot of people, there's then a gap to sort of your second, third of a kind because infrastructure capital is not there yet. And so my struggle with translation has been to talk to venture capital and make them understand why this can scale and why the carbon removal market is not as risky as they might think, but also why we're capex light and why we can scale this with creative solutions, not necessarily equity financing. And then we've worked with some really great philanthropic partners who've put debt into a PRI structure and allowed us to do first of a kind financing with debt, which is a huge unlock, and most people don't have access to that. So we've been very lucky, but it's being creative, and to your point of translating what do we need and what's out there and trying to align it with the mission of those types of companies and funding sources.